How's everyone doing today? Okay, I'm going to turn the music off because when I was testing earlier, I was getting a horrible reverb and I didn't have time to fix it or figure it out. But I hope you can hear me fine like this, just how I am. So welcome to Sephra's channel. It has been 100 years since I've streamed. Last time I streamed, according to my video on demands, was August. So it has been a long time. It's because I'm watching everyone else's streams, to be honest. Anyways, I'm here tonight to do a horror reading, horror, Horror reading. And tonight, this presentation has been sponsored by the Canada Council for the Arts and the Writers Union of Canada. Yes, they sponsor horror writers, and it's wonderful that they do. And so here we are doing this. So I'm just gonna, it's been a while, so I have to remember all the things. So I have my chat screen up. I'm gonna move my screen over to the side here, so I'm not staring at myself. And so it's really wonderful to be part of the Writers Union of Canada because they do coexist with the Canada Council for the Arts to create opportunities like this for writers. And any of you who want to join the Writers Union of Canada, if you're in Canada, you too can join the Writers Union. And there's all kinds of perks, which include things like doing readings online or in person, and you do get paid. You just have to apply. You also can get various health insurance benefits, which you pay for, of course, but it's a little bit cheaper than trying to do it on your own if you're a freelancer and that sort of thing. Because yes, even in Canada, we still need things like dental care and eye care that aren't covered under our general programs. And so it's a bittersweet evening because this is the first time I'm doing one of these readings and my dad's not here. He came, during the pandemic when all these online readings, I was doing quite a few, some sponsored, some not. My dad would show up for all of them. And I guess he might be here now. He died. And so maybe he's here watching the creepy things we do. So this one's for you, Dad, Arsenio Giron, and my mom, Patricia, who is still alive, but she won't be watching. And so before I begin my little reading, I do want to do a land acknowledgement because that's what we do here in Canada. So I am in Toronto in Etobicoke. So I found a new one. I know there's one I usually read, but I thought, it's been a couple of years. I'm going to see if I can find a new one. So this is what I found for today. We are on Indigenous land. The Anishinaabe woman named for this area as Adobegok, which means the place of the elders. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, aka the Six Nations Confederacy, the Wendat and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their guardianship of this land, but also like to remind and reaffirm, as Torontonians and Canadians, our accountability to these Indigenous nations and to all Indigenous peoples and communities living in Toronto. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, aka the Six Nations Confederacy, the Anishinaabeg, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for this land, its waters, and all of the biodiversity in the Great Lakes region. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We can give a minute or a thought of thanks and gratitude for allowing to be on this land and so that I can share my presentation with you. And now I am going to turn off the sound on my phone. Actually, first I'm going to just check to make sure things are showing up on Twitch, because, that's what I do. To make sure. Oh, yep, there I am. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, that's enough of that. nonsense, the sound is off, so you won't hear any blinging and blanging now. So you'll see on this side, I have a book up called Dearly Departed. I'm sorry I'm a little scattered today. It's one of those days. So that there's an anthology called Dearly Departed, which was put together by Andrew Robertson and myself. And it's a collection of 13 short stories and six of them are mine and 7 of them are Andrew's. And so together it makes 13 stories. And these are stories, most of the stories have been previously published. And so we put together this collection, and it's available in print and in ebook. You can get it on Amazon, and I believe we can now get it other places too. But it is a beautiful book. The cover art is Mothmeister, the company called Mothmeister that do these amazing photographs. So Great Lakes Horror Company bought the artwork, beautiful artwork. And in fact, some of the stories inside have artwork. And so I am going to be reading, there's another one. So when you get the print book, you see there's a jackalope. I do have, and some of you may have heard me read the jackalope story before here on Twitch or on YouTube or in real life, had a reading. So you know, she's holding the jackalope, but my beloved jackalope. And, but the story I'm reading tonight is not about jackalopes, but about puppets. So anyways, this is a beautiful book. You know, beautifully printed. It feels really nice. I highly recommend you just go grab one. You can go get one, order one right now. Anyways, so the story I'm going to read to you tonight is called Looking for Mrs. Peepers. And what it is it's a story. I have 3 stories that have been, what do you say? Sorry, I keep looking at the chat thing and looking at it all. It's been so long since I've streamed. I'm like, all the lights. So there's 3 stories I have in the anthology that are kind of connected, and they're about magicians, M-A-G, magicians, not musicians. This magician, a male and a female magicians, and the adventures that they have. So the very first story that involved them was published in a book about Ouija boards. And in fact, it was about trying to acquire this magic Ouija board. Well, magic or not, they went to get this Ouija board and shit went down. And I have to kind of preface that a bit because it is referenced in the story I'm going to read you. So the second story in the little trio of stories is the one I'm going to read you tonight. So in the first story, the Ouija board story, there is a puppet called Mr. Peepers, a marionette dude. And so this story, Looking for Mrs. Peepers, is related to that. So I just thought I'd fill you in a little bit that, you know, you're not crazy. There is, I am referring to things you may or may not know about if you haven't read stories yet. Okay, so I'm just double checking everything before I'm not looking at the screen anymore. I just want to make sure nothing's happening that is bad. All right. So far, so good, I think. Oh, I didn't even check my sound. Hang on. Is the sound? Yeah, okay. It says the microphone's working. And like I said, I was going to have music playing while I read, but there was like feedback and it was just so annoying. No one wants to hear that. So Looking for Mrs. Peeper was originally published in another anthology called Abandon. And Abandon was put together by the Horror Writers Association Ontario chapter members. And we were basically writing stories about abandoned places. And so I had this idea for this story, and so that's where it was previously published. And now you can find it in Dearly Departed. All right. Looking for Mrs. Peepers by Sephora Jerome, which is me. The thing about magic acts is that you always have to push further, be bigger and better than your previous act. This is both a joy and a curse. How far is too far? How far would I go to entice my audience? What will it take to leap from the parlor tricks at tables circuit to the big time? How big is big enough for a TV special or a series? Our reputation as a two-person magic and mentalism act grew even greater over the months. Obviously, the Ouija board gag ended when I took that cursed object back to that creepy witch town of Hermana. Danny never did tell me what horrific sacrifices he made to that board, and I never really told him how I managed to rescue him. They say to keep mystery in a relationship, and even though we're only partners in magic, there is much Danny will never know about me. However, Danny and Annie continue blowing people's minds. We coasted along for a while, just grateful to be alive. We performed across North America and then hopped over to England for a month. But once again, I grew bored of the antics. I grew bored of the acts. Oh, my mouse is being crazy for about a week now, and I need to get a new mouse. So that's not part of the story. It's I can't scroll. Okay, gotta switch to the keyboard. All right. Sorry, I'm just checking all my things. Oh, I dropped a few frames, but I think it's going to be okay. We coasted along for a while, just grateful to be alive. We performed across North America and then hopped over to England for a month. But once again, I grew bored of the acts. We'd done it all. We'd reinterpreted classic tricks to death. Maybe it's time we do the water tank, I said to Danny a couple weeks ago. His face grew a bit pale, and then he was back to his usual fast-talking, smart-ass self. Whoops. Why? We're doing well. Why rock the boat with new stuff when our popularity is organically growing? Danny was sitting on our leopard print couch, sewing together some colorful handkerchiefs for one of those pulling out the endless collection of cloths tied together magic tricks. I sat across from him, glue gunning some sequins onto a fascinator that matched my turquoise 50s-style pencil skirt dress laying across the nearby ironing board. The living room was in disarray as we prepared our props and costumes for another round of tours. We'd been doing this for so long, we had amassed plenty of crap. The pros and cons of such a hoard was that we could appropriate from one costume to another. The sequins and feathers I was applying to my newest hat was relieved from an old 30s ostrich feather evening gown. I planned to fashion the remaining material into a series of hat bands and scarves for me with matching ties for Danny. Our tickle trunk had exploded. Material hung from the shelves, on hangers across books. The dolls and puppets stared in disapproval, although they were always the first to be pleased with our end results. Danny put down the scarves and stood up. He plucked the feathers from my hand, and I stood to meet him. No water tank, he said. It's too dangerous. I'm too old and have these health things, and you're too young. And likely can't even swim. Nonsense, I said, fighting the urge to yell at him. It was always difficult to retain my shy, quiet, doting fangirl act when he was stubborn and stupid. I deserved an Academy Award for not yelling that he was a short-sighted old fool. Instead, I sighed demurely, as Marilyn would, and batted my long, dark, false eyelashes at him. Danny boy, oh, Danny boy, the water tank, the water torture, whatever you want to call it, can be modified for our modern times. We can do something new and unique. Somehow. I stroked his arm, staring into his eyes. It's expensive. Where would we build it? Where would we rehearse? He stopped talking and pushed my arm away. Hey, stop it. You can't hypnotize me. The water torture gag is out. No go for now, he said, stepping so close to me our lips nearly touched. I knew he wanted to kiss me. My own red-painted lips twisted into what I hoped Wasn't too cruel of a smile. Fine then, Danny. What should we do? What should be our new enticement for the people, our fans? Danny stepped away from me. Why rock the boat? We're doing fine. We can do better, I said as I waved my hand at the room. I bet we can't even afford the water gag if we wanted it. Danny sighed. He returned to the handkerchiefs and resumed his sewing. I returned to my fascinator, adding the proper hooks and wires into it for the gags it would be used in. As I waited for the glue to set, I looked around the room at the oddities on the shelves. Most had been there long before I had manipulated my way into Danny's life and career. There were all the books on magic and mentalism, and I'd actually read most of them. If not cover to cover, I'd at least glance through. Along with the books were the oddities, skulls and dolls, knickknacks from around the globe, disturbing and alluring. We had met the day he bought Mr. Peepers. In fact, it was that damn puppet that had pulled us together. I looked sadly at the ventriloquist doll. Mr. Peepers wasn't looking so good these days, and suddenly I felt bad. It was because of that damn Ouija board had caught on fire to begin with, and no one had bothered to repair him. Not me, not Danny, who had been so busy with the shows. Danny. Yes, my dear, Danny asked as he continued to sew and fuss with the clothes. Have you done an act with a ventriloquist doll? She asked. I asked. Of course, that's why I have so many. Well, maybe not that many anymore. I sent a few to new homes over the years. Maybe we could have something with them, those guys, I suggested. What are we going to do? It's all so boring and old-fashioned. No one wants to see these old dolls anymore. Not when magicians are making elephants. No, entire buildings disappear. Who cares about a wisecracking alter ego? Well, there are still lots of ventriloquists around the circuit, I said. Yeah, and they are starving worse than us, he retorted. We need a new act, a new doll. Maybe a new doll would give us inspiration. Maybe Mr. Peepers and another doll could do a mentalist act, so there would be 4 of us on stage. Danny said. My hopes grew slightly. A from Danny was usually good news. It meant if I did all the thinking, he might come along for the ride. I walked over to the various dolls he had on display in the living room. I touched them. There were 6 of them. Stroking their ugly faces, poked their wooden bellies, twisted their stringy red hair, and lamented their unseeing glass eyes. I don't think any of these will work. Well, for what I have in mind. Do you have any others? In other rooms, or maybe in the closet? No, I got rid of the others. I didn't like the idea of them locked up in boxes and trunks. They're all in good homes. We need a lady doll, I said, not these ugly red-headed things. Shh, they will hear you, Danny whispered half-jokingly. I rolled my eyes. None of these are ladies. They're all weird red-headed men. Howdy-doody, knucklehead, whatever. You keep buying these ugly red-headed men. I don't know why, since you're not a redhead. I'm a collector. Well, no point in hoarding them if we can't use them. I sighed, thinking of my mom back in Lucan, sitting in her hoard like Jabba the Hutt in his palace, reigning over his captors, constantly eating. Maybe we can rebuild, Danny suggested. Oh, no, hell no, I said. We make enough props and costumes. We're not going to start making dolls. We'll still have to dress it. Danny sewed in silence as I ran my hand along the bookcase where Mr. Peepers sat. Oh, Mr. Peepers, I sighed and lifted him gently from the shelf. He was heavy and cold, and when I touched him, a tingle raced along my arms, as if I'd stuck my hand into an electrical socket. His face was half melted, though he was a mixture of wood and plastic, paint and varnish. Half of his horrid red hair was gone. His clothes were singed. You're more like Phantom of the Opera now. We need to find you a Christine, I told him as I took him over to the couch and worked on cleaning some of the fire damage from his face. Give me a second. An internet search took me down a rabbit hole of eBay puppets and magician courses. At some point, I followed some kind of chain of links until I was looking at haunted and abandoned dolls around the world. There were piles of dolls in abandoned factories, stores, burnt-out houses. Even that haunted doll island one of those ghost hunting shows went to is featured on many sites. Then I found her. I found my Mrs. Peepers. I was lying on the couch in my leopard print bathrobe, my hair setting in leopard print scarf, Googling with my tablet, and I almost scrolled past her. Her black staring eyes somehow captivated me from where she lay on the filthy factory floor. The photo series was of an abandoned toy factory, or maybe a warehouse, or maybe it was a store. Tons of dolls, superheroes, cars, and animals were lying all over the place. Magic tricks, hoops, hats, dice, cards were stacked in boxes and flung around the floor. I couldn't make out why some items were stacked and others not. And why wasn't everything stolen? Who wouldn't want a bunch of magic stuff? Did the photographers steal all the good stuff after they shot the picture? At any rate, there on the ground, nearly out of frame, was a ventriloquist dummy with long brown ringlets and big black eyes, her mouth half opened as she stared at the camera. What make of doll is that? Where is this picture and when? Those black glass eyes gave me the chills, and that was only through a picture. I looked over at Mr. Peepers. He stared at me with his own devil eyes. What am I doing? I hate these damn dolls. But I just know we can get an act going with them. I scrolled more. I gasped. The photograph had been taken in Ontario. Not in some crazy California desert or a rest stop in Spain. Nope, that was right here in my own province. And even more interesting, it was in Aurora, a mere hour or two away. An abandoned toy factory, or was it a warehouse in Aurora? One that dealt in magic. Would that building and all its contents still be there after thousands of people staring at these photos? I checked the photos again. The doll photo had only been updated a few days ago. My arms filled with goosebumps and a chill ran up my back. Would she still be there? Would Mrs. Peepers still be lying on the floor? I had to know. I had to find out. There wasn't a moment to waste. The sense of urgency grew. My stomach nodded as I realized I couldn't spend another moment without rescuing Mrs. Peepers from the factory floor. She was calling to me, and I was answering. Not long ago, I'd finally finished getting all of my licenses, and so could drive up that long stretch of Highway 400 without having a chaperone. I didn't tell Danny where I was going, or what I was going to do. I tapped the factory coordinates into my phone GPS as I checked through my bags. I had flashlight, rope, several bags, duct tape, cloths, wet wipes, hammer, crowbar, screw bar, and a few other items, including a crate of water and some chocolate bars. A burglar's toolkit. Not much different than from a magician's. I didn't know what I'd find when I got there and didn't want to waste time looking for proper tools if I needed any at all. I changed into tight black capris with a black fitted baby tee and a black hoodie. I wore a light black cotton knee-length swing coat with many pockets over top. Black lipstick, black eyeliner, black eye shades. I wrapped a black kerchief around my curly black hair. A real Liz Taylor breaking into a factory. Or maybe I was Catwoman. Or something else. The magical GPS lady directed me to a faraway place in the wilds of Ontario. Well, not too wild. Just around where the major suburbs ended, way beyond Canada's wonderland, yet before Barrie and all the mountains. I drove down some crunchy gravel roads and hoped that our crapped-out Nissan Micra wasn't going to explode in the potholes. The sun was setting, and I was beginning to regret my impulsive choice. I can just turn around. No one knows where I'm going or what I'm doing. It's not like I failed. Failure is not an option. Pebbles exploded under my tires as I slowly drove down an endless road flanked by tall, foreboding trees. The smell of pine filled my nostrils, and I wondered if this was a Christmas tree farm or if there was one nearby. If I turn around, then I don't have to drive back down this endless pebble pit in the dark. Pitch dark, no lights on this road. But Mrs. Peepers is waiting for you. I shuddered. I looked into my rearview mirror, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, at that sensation of fingers tickling around my neck, dancing and fiddling until they suddenly grew tight. I shook my head and clicked off the radio. Stay focused. Again, that sense of being watched. I pulled over to the side of the road and stopped the car. I took a deep breath, not certain if I wanted to take my hands from the steering wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror again, but there was no one behind me on the road. I turned around and looked into the back seat. I nearly screamed. Mr. Peepers was sitting seat-belted into the back seat, his half-burned face leering, his one good eye bright and hopeful, while the other fixed me with a cold, accusing stare. Mr. Peepers, I said. My goodness, Mr. Peepers, how did you get there? I stared at him, trying to remember if I'd thought to bring him with me at the last minute. I didn't think I did. I never took Mr. Peepers anywhere. Mr. Peepers stared back. You want to sit in the front seat? I don't know why I asked him. I'd never taken him with me anywhere, yet something told me I should ask. He didn't answer. I likely would have had a heart attack if he did. I got out of the car and checked to see if any other cars were coming. Of course not. Who the hell would be coming out here? I picked up Mr. Peepers and put him in the front seat of the car. You could have ridden here all along if you had told me, I said as I buckled the seatbelt around him. He was too small for the seatbelt, but I didn't want him flying around the car if I had any sudden stops. I sort of didn't want him flying around anywhere. Seatbelted in beside me, he couldn't go anywhere. I could keep my eye on him. Well, that was my theory. How did he get seatbelted into the back seat? It took me 3 times to restart the car. My hands were trembling so badly. However, Mr. Peepers couldn't know he had startled me. Couldn't have the upper hand. What the fuck? Hello, Felicity. This is a doll, a toy, a puppet. You control him. You just forgot you brought him with you, that's all. Get a grip. I looked over at Mr. Peepers. He couldn't see over the dashboard, but maybe he could see out the side window if he turned his head. If he turned his head, I'd likely scream and crash the car. I just forgot I put him in the back seat, that's all. After another mile or two on the gravel road, there was a series of driveways that twisted and turned. I drove along one and then another and still another, the trees growing thicker, the fields smaller. At last, the magical GPS lady informed me that I had arrived at my destination. Yes, I had indeed. You know what? I'm going to turn the ring light down a tiny bit because it is bugging me. Hi, Omega. I'm just doing a reading, but I'm going blind with my ring light. Reading about haunted puppets. Haunted puppets. All right. So she has the... okay. I just forgot I put him in the back seat. That's all. After another mile or two on the gravel road, there was a series of driveways that twisted and turned. Now my eyes are just bugging out. I drove along one and then another and still another. The trees growing thicker, the field smaller. At last, the magical GPS lady informed me that I'd arrived at my destination. Yes, I had indeed. A story about you. I forgot about my, I don't have the the visual alerts, but I guess the old the sound alerts still work. It's been so long since I've streamed. Oh my goodness. Okay. I arrived at my destination. Yes, I had indeed. I parked the car and turned off the engine. A rush of goosebumps raced along my arm. A vision of Mrs. Peepers lying on the floor waiting for me in the dark flashed in my mind. With trembling fingers, I took my bag of tricks and slipped out of the car. Quietly, I shut the door, a flashlight in my hand. I stared ahead at the huge factory warehouse lot that lay beyond the large empty gravel parking lot. Dark windows with broken glass and thick silk of spider webs looked like mournful eyes daring me to enter. The last scarlet slashes of the setting sun splayed across the building. The factory was large and long. If it was a factory, I still think it's a warehouse or even just a forgotten store that just happened to be thrown into the photos about factories. Emporium? God, it could likely be the forgotten remnants of Tex and Edna Boyle's Oregon Emporium. This building was much smaller than the factories and warehouses downtown, but I guess it was because it had a rather select specialty: magic stuff, toys, props, hoops, hats, puppets, and even ventriloquist dolls. As I walked closer, quickly, as the air was growing chilly, Mrs. Peepers called out to me. Or at least, I think she did. "Hurry up, Felicity." How could she call me Felicity? I never use that name anymore. "It's Annie," I said out loud. There was a faint laugh, and then nothing but gravel crunching under my feet. Dark windows released no secrets. Giant faded painted letters were etched along the roof. Maybe once upon a time they gleamed with a message for passing cars, but despite the dying rays of the sun caressing them, there was no legible message to read. I didn't even bother to try. The sun was nearly down and the bugs were out. Damn bugs. I'd forgotten about annoying flying night bugs, being a city dweller and all. However, there was a small bottle of bug spray in the car just for this kind of sudden swarming. This place is creepy, even though I've slept in far worse. There's a vibe here. Something familiar. I can't quite tell. I'd forgotten. Ugh. I ran back to the car to get the bug spray. Mr. Peepers stared at the factory with a stern face, safe behind the glass window of the car. A slat of setting sun made his good eye gleam. He still couldn't smile despite my efforts at repairing him. I'd have to take him to a puppet maker. A cloud of gnats swarmed at my own face, ready to fly up my nose or down my throat. Mosquitoes had already discovered my tasty blood and were pricking me with their greedy needle nose despite many layers. "What? Is there something wrong, Mr. Peepers?" I sprayed the bug repellent across my body, head to toe, keeping the car door open. I tried to gauge his mood. "I just want to see what's inside. I'm not doing anything wrong." Yet. I smiled as I swatted at the bugs and put the bug spray back into the car. Mr. Peepers didn't answer. I shut the car door and looked around to assure myself the place was deserted. A tiny thrill swept through me. The thrill of... I'm scared. I'm scared of my own noises. Thank you for the follow or whatever the alert was for. Yeah, okay. Oh my God. Okay. La 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 la. So she's got the bug spray and a tiny thrill Okay. I smiled as I swatted at the bugs and put the bug spray back into the car. Mr. Peepers didn't answer. I shut the car door and looked around to assure myself the place was deserted. A tiny thrill swept through me. The thrill overshadowed the weirdness of seeing Mr. Peepers and the odd urgency that had compelled me here in the first place. No, the thrill was a shadow from my former life. My fingers itched as I crept closer to the factory. I I smelled the pine, the gravel, the old wood of the factory doors. My adrenaline flowed as I tested the locked doors, studied the jagged, broken windows, and wandered around the building. I tripped across an old broom leaning against the wall. As I fell, I was glad I wore gloves, as my hands caught my fall along the rubble. Luckily, nothing was more than scuffed. No sprains or cuts. I listened in the dark for the crackling of branches or any other indication someone else might be here, watching me. I crept along until I found the splintered wooden side panels. Whoops. Scrolling. I crept along until I found the splintered wooden side panels where the photographer must have crawled in. The oily scent wafting from the highway, the last lingering beams of the sun stroking my cheek reassuringly as I knelt down to crawl through the hole were auguries. This break-in was a necessary step on my path away from being a common thief and toward being the world's greatest magician. I clicked on my flashlight as I slipped through the hole in the wall, lifting the wood panels and choking on dust. Once I was in, I pushed the wood back into place. Not that anyone wouldn't notice my car in the parking lot or anything. My flashlight hid all the weird shit I expected it to. This wasn't a factory, though. It was indeed more like a warehouse. It was mostly empty, and there wasn't much more in it than what was seen on the internet, as far as I could tell. I stood up, pulling a second handkerchief over my face to protect from the dust. I walked carefully around boxes and tools, piles of dirt and dust, office equipment, large tables and chairs, tossed around barn stuff, even a tractor. I found the origin scene of the photo. My stomach gripped into itself tight, and a sudden sweat broke out across my forehead as my flashlight beam traced along the magic props and tools arranged just as it had been in the picture. My stomach lurched, my spidey senses tingling. Something wasn't right. The gnawing at my back, the trembling of my hands trying to steady the flashlight, all echoed in the sensation of being watched. Fear swept through me as the sudden creaking of boards, though a light wind startled me enough for words to fly from my lips. Steady tapping caught my attention. I turned and saw a broken window, shards of glass jutted up, a blackbird pecking at one. "What do you want?" I asked the bird. It stopped pecking and stared at me. Its eyes glistened in the flashlight rays. The omnipresent darkness of the outside world combined with the thick, humid darkness of the factory began to get to me. Bugs buzzed around my head, not caring that I wore bug spray. A shuffling sound emitted from the area of the table of goods, from where I thought the puppet might still be lying on the ground. I turned from the bird and shone the flashlight on the floor. I gasped in both fear and delight at the black-eyed stare of Mrs. Peepers lying there. "Mrs. Peepers!" I said, and stepped forward toward her. "Not so fast," a voice in the darkness said. I turned, my heart racing, every hair on my body standing on end. Eyes violet and red floated before me, long white teeth shining in the beam of my flashlight. I stepped back, fumbling in my pocket with my free hand for my switchblade. "Don't be foolish. Your weapons are no good against me," she said. "Who are you?" I asked. Though my eyes grew more accustomed to the darkness and her pale glow illuminated the room, I recognized her. "You might remember me," she said. "Natasha, of course. I booked a seance with you and Hermana when I was there," I said, my voice shaky, my hand abandoning the pocket knife. "Yes, you did." "And for payment, you stole a precious Ouija board," Natasha snarled. "Which I returned," I said. "Only because it was cursed, not because it was the right thing to do," Natasha said. "Well, yeah," I admitted. "And now you want to steal this?" Natasha said as she suddenly held Mrs. Peepers in her hands before me. Her name is not Mrs. Peepers. It is Laverna, Natasha said. Laverna left her hands and floated towards me, a glow around her as if a ball of electricity was being pushed by Natasha's hands. I stepped back from the approaching doll, but Natasha's stern voice spoke in the darkness. Laverna is now yours. You will use your left side to be at one with her, never the right, Natasha said as she waved her hands. The air snapped and sparked as the doll approached me, black eyes blinking, her wooden mouth creaking up and down. I held the flashlight with my right hand and extended my left to welcome her. She was heavy as she attached herself to me, her clacks and groans from years of inactivity moaning in my ears. I lurched back with the weight of the doll, falling into a nearby chair. I sat with her on my lap, her legs over mine, her face turning to look at me. Her eyes snapped open and shut. "Hi, Laverna," I said. I waited. Nothing happened. I moved my fingers along her mechanisms, but she didn't wish to speak. "I hope you're going to enjoy your new home. I have someone waiting to meet you in the car," I said to Laverna. I waited. The gears were warm against my fingers. In fact, they were growing hotter. I wiggled my fingers. There was a tapping at the window. That bird again. What did it want? I trained the flashlight toward the annoying sound, and Mr. Peepers stared back. I dropped the flashlight. Laverna was burning my fingers, and I struggled to pull out my hand. Her insides gripped me in a surreal clasp, and I yowled as I tried to retrieve my hand, her mouth clapping open and shut at my efforts. At last, I was finally able to withdraw my burning hand, the glove trapped in the gears. My hand was bloody. I pushed Laverna away and set her in the chair. The bugs discovered my ungloved and bloody hand and set to work feasting. The flashlight rolled away from the dusty, filthy floor. I followed it, the tapping continuing behind me. I crawled, anxious to capture the escaping flashlight. "Natasha, can you help me? Natasha!" I called out to the blackness. There was a throaty laugh, more like a cackle, as Natasha was clearly enjoying herself at my expense. The light of the flashlight winked out, and soon I was crawling on the floor with boxes of puppets and magic tricks. Rattles and jingles filled the air as I crawled, reaching for any source of light. Why was I so stupid to bring only one flashlight from the car? I saw the outline of Natasha, an electrical surge. She laughed one more time, and then she contracted into a ball of light. The sphere shot out the window with a scream of delight. "Wait!" I called out. She was gone. I was left in the dark with noises and shifting air and magic tricks ready to explode at every touch. Something jumped onto my back, ripping at my hair. Then another attack, pulling at my arm. Giant overhead lights struggled to flicker to life, creating flashes like an old-fashioned cartoon. Mr. Peepers and Laverna were both jumping on me. They punched and pushed, their clacking and clattering creepy in the darkness. Straw hair and limbs struggled, rolling across each other. A wooden hand smacked my nose. I realized Mr. Peepers was fighting Laverna. In the crazy flickering light, it was hard to tell what was going on. Mr. Peepers was on top of Laverna, punching her. He turned his ghoulish head towards me, his eyes sparkling. He blinked as Laverna grabbed his hair, pulling him back down for a fight. I scrambled to the other side of the room, watching them battling with each other in disbelief. All I knew was there were no puppets with me, and I was gonna make a break for it. The keys were still in my coat pocket, and I figured out where the hole in the wall was as the lights continued to sputter. I crawled away from the battling puppets and hightailed it to my car. Getting in, I found the key was still in my pocket, and I pushed it in the ignition slot. The car started. I drove out of that parking lot like a bat out of hell, gravel spraying behind me in large dusty clouds. I drove back down that long, winding gravel road quickly, but not as quickly as I wanted. If I destroyed the little Micra, I'd be trapped in the middle of nowhere. So once away from the old warehouse, I took my time despite the urge to hot rod it. After all, if Natasha was after me, she'd just show up again. Speeding around wasn't going to stop her. Oh, Natasha. I expected to see her around every corner. The quest for the next big thing continues endlessly. I'm not going to do a damn thing with those ventriloquist dolls, at least not while a witch is mad at me. She went through a lot of trouble to lure me up there, yet she didn't kill me. You see, I went back to my computer to see the doll, Laverna, again, and make some sense out of what happened. But I was never able to find that website and those pictures again. Even the GPS information was erased from my phone, as if I'd never gone up to that warehouse factory at all. The witch doesn't scare me. It was gonna take a lot more than a creepy dummy and a Brigadoon-esque factory to wear me down. I don't know what Natasha wants, but I know she's not done yet. In the meantime, I keep an extra eye on Mr. Peepers. He was sitting in his spot on the shelf when I got home that night, as if nothing had ever happened, with the exception of some long black hair in his fingers. And despite that witch, I had filled my pocket with lots of magic tricks, and illusion props, so the trip hadn't been in vain one bit. It'll take a bit of thinking, but I know I'll come up with a new act soon. I've not quite given up on the water torture yet either. And I've not given up looking for Mrs. Peepers. So that was my story, looking for Mrs. Peepers.